David, you're still muted.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that's why it's good to have backup and help. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Jody. Uh, yeah, the real work gets done by Jody and Amanda. I just blather to everybody. Good morning, everybody. We'll be starting up in about a minute. Let everybody log in. You might want to get the download. Open up your chat pod, your Q&A pod. Get ready to raise your hands and go to polyev.com/DavidOrP or download the app. So we'll give folks about 30 more seconds to get started. And hope everybody is having a nice day. It's a little sticky this morning, but not too bad as we get on towards last couple of weeks of summer. Okay. Okay. Let me switch over to the list of folks in attendance and say good morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the Cornell Local Roads Program, where you're a New York State LTAP Center. And I hope everybody is having yourself a great day. We're talking today about ethics. It's really about what would you do, some ethical choices. And we are going to be doing polls using pollev.com, different styles for some of them. There's a handout. If you've opened up your chat pod, the link for the handout will show up there. If you have an issue getting to the handout, some people can't download from the box, just send us an email and we can email that to you. It's not a problem. Now, if you haven't been on one of these webinars before, your lower left, you're going to have audio settings. As I say, open the chat pod up. That's where we'll send you links so you don't have to type them in. But remember, that's a one-way today. That's just where we can send you messages. It's disabled for you. I may ask you to raise your hand a couple of times during our hour together, and then the Q&A is where you can put things in. Any questions you've got, both on the problems that I ask and also if you've got issues with the audio or video or anything like that. And the certificates for this, they'll be sent up pretty quick. Doesn't take us that long to do it. Though obviously, if you're asking for the PDHs, you're going to have to wait. We'll wait till we get the payment. It is worth one professional development hour. In fact, it meets the ethics requirement here in New York State. Only the person registered. And you should be in pretty good shape. If you're outside of New York, you'll have to check with your LTAP center to see what's involved there. Okay? Now, we have one more webinar coming up next week on snow and ice strategy. This is our penultimate webinar today. And we also then are getting ready for our fall workshop season. We hope to see you there before these all fill up. Go ahead and sign up. Solutions for Safer Roads and Snow and Ice. And oh, by the way, on the handout, you'll also see a link to the Bridge Conference as well. Now, just to get everybody on the same page and have a little bit of fun, just to show you how the polls work, and then we're going to ask some questions about who you are. We're going to do a single choice question, and we'll do a few of these just to get you going. So who do you work for? Okay, I work for, and then I'm going to open the polls up. Okay, I work for a town, a county, a city or village, state or federal, tribal, MPO, authorities, consultants, contractors, and a few of you who just work for a living. At least we have a couple of honest folks. It is an ethics class today. Okay. I used to say working for the weekend. Maybe I'll change that back for the next time we do this. So we have, as I expected, about a little under half consultants, quite a few state and federal, county, okay, and a city or village and an authority. Okay, it's about what I expected. Okay. What is your job? Are you an administrator? You're the highway superintendent, commissioner? If you're a deputy, check off that box. Are you an engineer, a planner? Are you in the field? Are you a supervisor, an elected board member? You do whatever the boss tells you to do, or none of the above. If you type in none of the above, I would ask you to please put what that means in the Q&A, just so we can get what the two of you who've put that in, what that means. And if you can't access the polls, feel free to put the answer in the Q&A. I really use that to help sort of modify some of the answers and just make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay? So again, if you are typing it in with none of the above, tell us what that is. Okay, so you're a heavy equipment operator. Ooh, cool. I like it. Well, there's a couple we have here that might be that. Okay. And then you can, this one you get to click on it. Where are you? Okay, you click on the map of New York State. Again, if you can't, you can always type that in where you're from, just to get a sense. Okay. Well, I got quite a variety all over the state. That's good. Okay. Syracuse, Rhinebeck, and Richford got added to the polls as well. Okay. And Lower Westchester, Albany, working in Fort Ant. Well, at the virtual stuff, I mean, where you're from, is it where you are today, or where is it you work or live? This can all be very different with the world of the virtual. Okay. Now, as I promised, I got to clear this. Oh, that's right. I got to clear this. Hang on. That was last time. Um, I've been promising each time we do these polls, we're going to have a little bit of fun. So, who's your favorite Muppet? And then I'll tell you my top three when you're done. Your favorite animal? Well, I like that one. Big Bird. Yep. Big Bird's good. He's in my top three. So, yep. Gonzo, Miss Piggy. Okay. Oscar the Grouch, Cookie Monster. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if anybody puts. You got two of my three because Kermit's one of my top three. Let's see what else you've got. Snuffleupagus. Ooh, wow. Swedish Chef. Nobody did Beaker. I see. Okay. Just if you're wondering, my third on my list, and again, it depends what mood I'm in, is I'm not sure it's one Muppet, but I treat it that way, and that's Waldorf and Statler, the two old guys at the Muppet Show. But yeah. Okay. Again, just have a little bit of fun to get us all going. So those are the kind of things we might ask, just have a little bit of fun, interactive, a little bit of choice, because the idea is ethics comes down to choices and not always the right ones. So for instance, if you've been at a conference, you've all probably been to a conference or an event. If I ask you what you've picked up in the way of swag, what's the first thing that comes to mind? You know, something you've picked up at a conference. And I'm going to give you five choices. You may have gotten something else, but I'll give you five choices. We've got candy, key rings, pins, coasters, recycling bag. What have you got? Yeah, pin. I know more than a few folks that the only pins they ever use are ones they pick up at conferences. Yeah. Ooh, memory stick. That's a good one. I like that over in the list there. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about what ethics is. Obviously, it's a requirement for continuing education here in New York State. But ethics can mean lots of things. There's personal ethics, there's business ethics, there's professional ethics. There's even community ethics that people will talk about. There's actually some pretty cool books on this. Okay. And so ethics is really a hard thing sometimes to define, and that's what makes it challenging. Heck, pirates had an ethical code. They had rules that they followed, okay? And if you broke those rules, you didn't get part of the booty, okay? That was the way it worked. They were actually pretty close to a democratic system within the ship, but overall, probably not the most ethical set of folks, but they did have a form of ethics, and that's what's challenging about ethics. Your ethical standards may not be the same as someone else. And so we have to ask what ethics is. And it could be everything from professional ethics, where you're talking about engineering kind of things. It could be personal ethics, where you're dealing with how you treat other people. But it also could be lines that you don't want to cross because you'll get people in trouble or hurt somebody. So ethics can be a bit of a challenge. And so we're going to talk about ethics for this hour. We're going to actually put scenarios in front of you. And if you've got one you want to add to the pile, I've got about 50 right now that I've collected, real world problems. Send them to me and maybe I'll take one out and put yours in instead. I love good new ethical problems. In fact, I've got one. If we get time, we might add at the very end of the day. We'll see how timing goes. Now, when I first developed this idea of doing these ethical scenarios, I used a whole bunch of books, and they're referenced, they're available in the handout. And in the back of one of the books, it actually said that you're supposed to do the ethical thing, and then it says, provided there is no legal duty to do otherwise. And I have to admit, I actually don't agree with that particular statement. And the reason is because sometimes the law gets taken, it falls behind for a variety of reasons. And the example I usually give when I'm talking to folks about this is, think about the folks who, like Rosa Parks. She broke the law by sitting on a bus in a spot that was not, quote unquote, reserved or was reserved for others. She broke the law. Was that ethical? Was it legal? And I think you have to be careful about that's one of the challenges about ethics. Sometimes we need to do things even though the law says we're supposed to do something else. We only have one or two of those today, but we do have them. There are real dilemmas that exist where You have to decide which is most important, your ethics, and again, what kind of ethics you're dealing with. Now, part of ethics is giving permission and giving credit where credit is due. And so most of these I've picked up from others. And in fact, the whole series of them I picked up from a gentleman who used to work with the New Jersey LTAP Center named Ted Green. And so just to give him credit. And as we go through these, I may give credit to a couple of the folks that have given me these. So in a couple of cases, folks specifically said they didn't want credit. And you have to honor that. I don't want my name out there. So now, every organization is supposed to have a code of ethics. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if your company or organization, if you work for the government, has a code of ethics. Raise your hand if they have a code of ethics. Okay, now there are 90 of you on today, and we'll see how many of you raise your hand. Now, again, if you can't access, I won't assume everybody can perfectly access all of the fancy tools, but about half of you, it looked like, before we got cleared, raised your hand. Okay? Every organization is actually required to have a set of ethics. Okay? And they have to have training on it. We have to have training here at Cornell. I do training, haven't done it in about 2 years. In fact, I'm a little surprised. We usually do some training on ethics, especially dealing with financial stuff. But when it comes to engineering, there are ethics out there. There are actually people who argue we should not put down these things in writing. And their arguments actually do make some sense. Let's go through some example code of ethics. The two I'm going to use as my starting point are the National Society of Professional Engineers and the American Society of Civil Engineers. Interestingly enough, I've read about a dozen different codes of ethics, most of the different societies in engineering, because they do a class on campus that has to deal with multiple different societies. So they all start the same way. Interestingly enough, when it comes to engineering, safety, health, and welfare of the public, that they all start that way. They might slightly skew the words a little bit, but pretty much the same thing. And what it says, and it makes sense, everything starts around the welfare of the people we serve, the public, safety, health, and welfare. If you're not sure, think that, you'll probably be okay. They usually say perform services only in the area of competence. In other words, what you know. 30 years ago when I started at Cornell, well, 30 plus, I'll just say that, I could have designed bridges, would have no problem doing so, and did so. Today, you don't want me designing bridges. My area of competence, I'm behind on bridges. We host the bridge conference, but I don't do enough design where I would feel comfortable doing that work. On the other hand, there are things I can do now that I couldn't do then. Life changes this. Only issue objective and truthful public statements. Okay, so far, no conflicts. We're doing pretty good. Now, let's start getting where we get conflicts. Act for an employer or client as a faithful agent or trustee. But what if they want you to do something that you don't think improves the safety, health, and welfare of the public? Okay? And then avoid deceptive acts and conflicts of interest, but that can lead to issues with your employer. So you have to ask yourself, what are the lines you don't want to cross? And of course, we need to uphold and enhance the honor, integrity, and dignity of the engineering profession. There are more canons, but these are the 6 that are pretty universal. You see them in most places. One of the interesting things when they ask people about professions they feel have good, strong ethics, engineering usually shows up towards the top of that list. We need to keep that. And we got to do that by following through with good ethics. Now, here's a good example of things you shouldn't do. You may have all seen this in the news. This was put out by the City of Flint, Michigan government. Flint water is safe to drink. It wasn't. It had lead contamination at levels that were pretty bad. So, we definitely don't want to do things like that. And that's an easy one, or it should have been, and yet people were out there making these statements. So let's just ask about your policies a little bit. And again, fun little cartoon. And yes, I get permission to show the cartoons. There appears to be a whistleblower in our midst. Okay. As a guy who also referees sports, I like this little cartoon. But let me ask you, what makes a good ethical policy? Okay. In this case, we're going to create a word cloud. They used to be called Wordles, but with the little game Wordle that shows up on the web, the term has changed, as does with the English language. So it's not just called a word cloud. Okay. So they have to have honesty in them. They need to be transparent. That's good. I like that. Clear and specific. Okay. Universal for everybody. Yep. Okay. There are four things which most people think are really important. Okay. They have to have the truth in them. Yeah. They have to be transparent. Yep. They have to be specific. There it is. I see it. There's enforceable. They have to have some enforceability to them, but for the most part, they need to be self-enforcing. They need to be written in such a way that people self-enforce, but they do need to hold people accountable if they do transgress, if they cross over certain boundaries. And while they need to be specific, there has to be some flexibility because ethics is a really, really tough line. I have friends and family members who've taken ethics classes on how they deal with what are euphemistically called payments for services in other countries outside the United States. They actually have rules on how they go about doing what you and I would call a bribe. Um, how do you deal with things like that from an ethical standpoint? It can be a bit of a challenge. Um, so we'll go from that. Now, when I took my undergraduate materials class, it was taught by two old professors. Okay, well, both have now since retired. But the older one, he taught us about things like aesthetics and factors of safety and things like that. And one of the things he said, which of course we didn't believe because we were seniors and we knew better, is that you would have an ethical dilemma in your career. And he said you'd do better. And this is one of the few times that I'll quote somebody. You need to know what you would do before the ethical incident happens. I remember that. That was a phrase that stuck in my head. Now, Floyd never wore a tie that I ever saw. I mean, he was always wearing Hawaiian shirts, but I couldn't find a picture of him when I went to get a picture. Um, I thought at the time he was crazy. Oh, yeah, I'm a senior. I know better. Now, he was right. And I've come across a lot, and I think about a third of the dilemmas we're going to talk about today, the scenarios as I call them, are actually ones I've experienced. Okay, so what I want you to think about is what you would do when these things happen. And think about your own career, ethical scenarios that might happen. If you've thought about them a little bit beforehand, when they do occur, you're going to be much better off. You're going to do a better job of answering the question. Now, some critical points to think about. Okay. I'm going to read you an ethical problem. It's simplified because we're doing this an online activity. Okay. I'm then going to do a poll everywhere, poll, and let you answer. What I want you to think about is the first thing that comes to your brain. Okay. You may, on reflection, want to change it, and you can, and you maybe should, but I really want you to be thinking about how would you respond if something happened. Okay. Because that's going to really help you later on when the ethical dilemma happens. And the other thing is, you may have one thought, you may need to do multiple things. Think about the first thing you would do, unless I give you the set says pick two, pick three, or rank them. And there'll be different ways we do these, okay? And we're going to start with one, and if you've taken this ethics class, you've seen this one. This is one I talk about a lot. I call it the retired engineer. You're retired, and it could be from engineering, it could be in a soil and water conservation district, it could be a government service, it doesn't really matter. Somebody who's retired from the organization, you know them pretty well. You're at the local gym and you see them roughhousing with someone who's really fairly young. At a level you just don't feel comfortable, okay? So I'm going to ask you to think about what's your first thing you might do. You might do multiple things, but what's the first thing you would do? And let's do the poll and see what y'all think. And your choices are stop the roughhousing, call the cops, report the incident to the gym, walk away and say nothing, or talk to the retiree later, one-on-one. What's the first thing that came to mind? And you may do multiple things. I know that. And again, you can put in the poll. I've got people saying talk to the retiree. Stop the roughhousing. I've got people doing. I got nobody calling the cops. And I can understand that. Okay. I referee sports. I have to take something called safe sport. This comes about. They actually talk about things like this. What do you do if you see certain things? And the reason I bring this up is to show the difficulty of ethics, what makes it so challenging. This is, by the way, if you're wondering, this comes from a real world case. This is the case of Penn State, okay? And you're actually Mike McCreary in this case. I'm not going to get into any of the goods or bads of that whole incident. All I want you to understand is what happened in the real world. Okay, the Lancet, which is the equivalent of the American Medical Association's journal in Great Britain, did a study looking at incidents like this one and figured out that 25%, one quarter of people who are required by law to report, trained professionals, would have walked away and said nothing. And we know they all should have done at least something, and Mike McCreary did do something. Um, Always have to ask yourself, what do you do and how much do you do? And that makes these things difficult. So let's do scenarios. And again, these are all ones that have been picked up over the years. They're not from books. They're all real world scenarios. Okay, so the first one's an easy one. Nothing to do with engineering. It's more of a personal ethics kind of thing. You've got a local vendors doing work with your agency, and they offer you a cap or a coffee mug with the company logo on it. Okay? Say, hey, how you doing? You want a cap? There's a cap with our name of our company, you know. Do you accept the cap or the mug? Do you refuse it? You say, I'll take one if you got one for everybody on the crew. Accept it, but then give it to somebody else because you just don't want to keep those kind of things. So what do you do? Okay, and by the way, I'm going to warn you now, I'm going to ask you in the poll to type in why you made the choice you made. So just get ready for that. So I've got most of you saying you'd accept it. A few would refuse it. And I've already got people ahead of me. That's good. I like to see that. They say it's a small item. You go ahead and accept it. Okay? Again, if you pick the solution, if you're willing to, put in the Q&A why you made that choice. Okay? If you prefer not to, I'm okay with that. I can understand that. But if you picked one of those choices, why is it okay to accept it? Why is it okay to ask for the entire crew? Because again, you want to think about it. Yeah, it's just a hat. You might reject it because the policies don't allow it or do allow it. Okay? It's inexpensive. You may not want the company's name on there. Yeah, refuse it because it only opens up problems. Some agencies have a gift, no gift over $5. Some people have a collection of hats from vendors. Some people have zero tolerance. Again, think about that. Now, one of the things I want you to keep in mind as we move forward, all of these ethical dilemmas may run afoul of your company policy in your own mind. If you have a choice for some of these, and I may point them out, use what you personally would do, not what your company would do, which makes it challenging at times. And there's a couple that I'll pick out when we go through them. I want you to think what you would do if you had been able to write the company policy. Okay? So now I've got an organization. I'm going to now make you all county highway officials. Maybe the county highway superintendent or a deputy, doesn't really matter. And you need to attend a meeting about a project, okay? Well, you've got a grant from the New York State Department of Transportation, okay? And the people that are going to the meeting from the state DOT have an office that's across the street, okay? And the site you need to go to, it's a big county, it's an hour away, okay? So do you go to the meeting and drive separately? Do you drive together? But you drive together, but you promise no discussions about this project because it's a grant you've got with the state DOT. Okay? So let's see. Both drive separately. And again, I'm going to ask you, throw into the Q&A why you think that choice is the right choice. I'm okay. Again, there are good arguments for at least two of those three. There's one of them usually at most of these polls. I'm like, please don't answer that. But why was that okay? Somebody put A because of insurance reasons. Some people chose it because of perceptions. Yeah, the perception if you're together is you're talking, which is why C is very difficult. Nobody's going to believe you didn't talk. Some people say you should drive together because of carbon footprints issues. Okay? And so you just have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Okay? Got to deal with all the paperwork and the headaches. Okay? And again, what you might do based on your policy might be different than what you might do personally. Okay? And that can create some challenges. And some people said, hey, I'd prefer to drive alone. And that's okay too. Again, that's what makes ethics, I think, sort of fun. Okay? Now, I'm going to continue. You're still no, actually, we'll change it today. We'll do a slightly different way. You're no longer a county highway official. Okay. You're back to being a consulting engineer. Okay. You're not the engineer in charge. Okay. You're a consulting engineer working on the job. There's somebody else who runs the job. But you show up to look at some work. And while you're there, you notice nobody's wearing hard hats. You know it's a federal aid job. Okay. So what are you going to do? Are you going to walk away? Are you going to talk to the worker directly? Are you going to talk to the contractor doing the work? Are you going to talk to the owner, which might be the county or the state? Or are you going to call the Department of Labor slash OSHA? Okay. Now, again, you may do more than one, but which one? Yeah, almost everybody says talk to the contractor. Okay. Some people talk to the workers. Okay. Now, I'm not arguing that any of these, except maybe walking away, uh, isn't a good idea. It can be. But let me ask you this. What's the risk of talking to the owner? Yeah, I like the answer, by the way, somebody put. If contractor's not responsive, then you could go to OSHA, the Department of Labor. Yeah, but what's the risk of talking to the worker? Nobody's brave enough to put that one in there. This could be a conflict. It could actually exacerbate things. Okay, it actually might make things in some cases less safe because now they're more about angry with you and you're not their boss. So it's a catch-22. We do a flagger pocket guide that we send out, and I actually will sometimes have them with me, and I see a flagger just doing really bad stuff. Very rarely do I give them a copy of the pocket guide. The most likely thing they're going to do is throw it back at me and tell me I'm number one. You have to think about who you're going to talk to, how you're going to get the most traction to improve safety. Okay? Now, we're going to send you to a conference. Okay? I'm going to send you to a conference. I'm actually going to look at a national conference we're hosting next summer. We're going to a site visit starting today. But next year, we're going to be hosting a big conference. But I'm going to send you to a conference, and we're going to pay for you to go. Your employer is paying for you to go. And there's a raffle at the end of the conference for a big item. Let's make it an iPad today. So you get a brand new iPad. It's part of the conference fee. Okay? So you could possibly win. Did you accept it if you want it and take it home? Did you accept it and take it to work? Did you refuse it? Did you accept it if you can pay what's known as a nominal fee for it, essentially a reimbursement amount? Accept it publicly or turn it back in later. And again, I want you to answer what you would do, not your company policy. In this case, I do not want you to use your company policy because I know many of you have a company policy that says refuse it and or there's requirements on what you do with it. I want you to think what you would do personally, okay? And most of you would take it home, some of you would refuse, and a few would take it to work. And if you're willing to, tell me in the poll, in the Q&A, why you chose your answer, okay? Why we chose your answer. If it's allowed by policy, so personally I would keep it, okay? Some people say it's the property of the company and not me. It's probably the people who chose take it to work, okay? And some people are just not comfortable accepting, okay? Because they were there at the company's expenses, okay? Again, what you would do, and it's a challenging thing. Now, if it's everybody from the organizations who's there, 100%, does it change your answer versus if you found that was only available to people who have a certain class? Maybe only the people who work for government or only the people who work for uh, the private sector? Would that change your answer? If it does, then you're starting to reach an ethical problem that it starts to get more challenging. And the one thing, by the way, I would never choose personally, and I think it's because of perception as much as anything, is accept it publicly and then turn it back in later on. Everybody saw you accept it, and even if you turn it back in later on, the perception is you took it. And so be very careful about things like that. Much better to just either never let them, just never accept it, or to please ask, hey, don't choose my name. Okay? Now, I go for hikes in the morning. I like going for hikes, wandering around, and during COVID, I wandered all over the place. So I was out walking across. This is one that happened to me, And there's a bridge that's on the Cornell campus, built by students about 43 years ago now. Beautiful bridge, okay? Pedestrian only. And as I'm walking across it, there was a part that didn't look right. It didn't have that good engineering aesthetic. So I went underneath and looked, and sure enough, there was a part that was literally within a quarter inch of the wood slipping and the whole thing failing. The bridge wouldn't collapse, but the decking might. And what would probably happen is somebody would go through and could hurt themselves pretty badly, break their ankle, probably not life-threatening, but certainly a serious injury possible. So what are you going to do? And this is going to be a text wall. So you're going to type an answer in. And again, if you can't put it in the Q&A, what would you have done in this case? What would you get? And I'll tell you what I did. Okay. What would you get to type in your answers? You'd report it. Okay. But report campus maintenance. Yeah. Okay. Call public safety. Yeah. Report it. Okay. Most of you are doing contact who's responsible. Report, suggest the bridge be closed. Yeah. Let somebody know. Okay. And here's where it's, oh, it's easy to do, but it's on a Sunday. uh, it turns out the people who maintain the bridge aren't necessarily the easiest to find. So at what point, how do you raise it up the chain? Okay. It took me a while. I mean, I spent probably 45 minutes trying to figure out who I needed to contact to get the bridge closed. And yeah, some people just say call 911 or call a non-emergency police number to let somebody know. Um, yeah, you have to figure that out, and you have to be willing to take that time to do it. Ask yourself if you know somebody who might have just said, heck, can't figure it out, I'm not going to bother. Okay? Now, the funny thing is because the bridge got closed, they actually realized, hey, we got a problem, and they actually found the money to do a proper fix on it. So now it has a 20-year fix rather than Band-Aids, which have been thrown at it for the last 10 years. So sometimes actually reporting something can actually have a long-term benefit. So I'm a big fan. If you've got an ethical dilemma and you're feeling comfortable, go for it. Now, can be challenging, okay? I'm going to give you a series of choices here. You're going to pick your top two. First two things that come to mind, okay? You're inspecting a job, and this say we'll make it a chip seal since that's in the picture. And you notice the contractor is not following the specs. He's using a slightly different stone mix, or he's doing a slightly different application. But you realize, what he's doing actually might last longer, okay? Might actually be a benefit. So what are you going to do? What's the first thing that came to mind? Are you going to ignore it? Are you going to document it, just put it in writing, but not tell anybody? You don't want to make any waves. You're going to talk to the contractor about following those specs? Are you going to make a change order? Are you going to inform the engineer? And I know what the answer is going to happen here. And sure enough, yep, exactly what I thought would happen. I've got a few folks in the Q&A who say inform the engineer, document it, and one person change order. So we have 4 people who are willing to do a change order. Okay? And somebody's saying, well, it's not my decision for the change of mix. But if you're the person doing the inspection, we are fearful of change orders. I don't know why we are fearful of change orders, but we are. Whenever I ask this particular question, change orders almost never come up. They say, oh, I'll talk to the contractor engineer. We'll make them follow the spec. The spec's right. But the spec isn't always right. Like it or not, we are humans. Now, don't just let them keep doing it. Don't ignore it. Thank you. Nobody put that down. And document it and keeping quiet. The one thing I've heard from folks at the federal and state level is they can't stand it when somebody writes something down that they see as an inspector and they just put it in the report and nobody has a chance to follow up. You really want to let people have a chance to either get it back to the proper spec, if that turns out to be the right choice, or to do the change order if that's the right choice. So again, I can't argue against the talk to the contractor, inform the engineer, but I'm always stunned by the fact that almost nobody goes, well, really probably should think about a change order. That was one of the things that came to my mind. And then the process for doing that. Now, in this case, we haven't started the project yet. You've got a contractor's bid. They're doing building or bridge work. It doesn't really matter. Okay. And they've got a unit price for paint. Okay. Of 1 penny per gallon of paint. And there's 1,000 gallons of paint for the job. Okay. So what are you going to do? Are you going to accept as submitted, reject all the bids, ask the contractor if it's correct, or negotiate a change order after you accept? I know what the answer is going to be here. It's an unbalanced bid. Yep, somebody put that. Okay. Ask the contractor if it's correct. Now, I'm going to ask you, please raise your hand if you have a policy that says you can't ask the contractor until after acceptance. Raise your hand. I know many of you do. Yeah. And this is where we get a problem in unbalanced bids. So in the Q&A, give me 2 reasons why somebody might have actually bid 1 penny on the paint. There's 2 reasons. One, probably okay. One, they're actually probably not. There's 2 reasons, and that's what makes it so challenging. They figured the cost in another item because they thought the quantities were wrong. And they're like, I'm going to get the job, and I can get the job and then make a lot more money on something else. It's a bust on the quantities, yeah. Or they have leftovers from another project. They want to get rid of them anyway, and by keeping the price down, they can maybe get this particular job, and they don't mind because they've already paid for it with the other job. Yeah, both are correct. But one is ethically probably okay. One of them is not. And that's where it creates some of these problems. And that's why some agencies say, hey, if that happens, you either have to reject or accept. And again, these are difficult, very hard in a 1 hour webinar to do much more than just start you thinking about it. Ask yourself, what is it would be a perfect world? If you can figure out the whys, you'd really have a much better sense of what the right thing to do. Now, here's one. This is fun. I do this one for the students here on campus. And I'll tell you what the students answer in this one every single time. It's 100%. So we got a job improvement for an intersection. Okay. Now, the intersection improvements, these are relative costs, please. They are old. I know that, but the relative costs are okay. And the lives saved are from the Highway Safety Manual, the HSM. Okay. And so you could just put up some new signs at the intersection. You could put in a traffic light. You could put in a roundabout, or you can put in a bypass all around the area. Okay. And the agency cost, as you can see, goes from only $10,000 to $3 million. And if you run the numbers, your number of lives saved varies from 2 to 5 up to 10, 15 to 25. And the public support, there's some opposition to the new signs. They want more. They don't want traffic lights. I don't want traffic lights. They really hate roundabouts. They really want you to put in a bypass. Okay? So, are you ready? Let's see how you vote. Okay? In this case, you can rank your order. You can drag them up and down and put them in the top order. Which would you first, second, third, and fourth? Okay? Which one would you rank if you were ranking them? By the way, if you do the math, they have very similar cost-benefit ratios. So it's not a cost-benefit ratio problem. These are set up in such a way that this particular problem, they weren't perfectly balanced, but close enough for our sakes, we can assume they're pretty much equal. So, okay, so cost benefits are similar. Okay, and people are putting in cool. Some people are just putting their top answer, which is okay. So some people put traffic light. Some people are putting in, okay, safety of the roundabout. Okay. Some people are putting in the bypass. Okay. Now, for those of you who chose the roundabout, why did you choose the roundabout? It doesn't save the most lives. I saw somebody put in the Q&A, but I'll see if I get somebody else to answer. The public hates them. I mean, they really do. They're one of those almost controversial things even now. It keeps traffic moving. Again, don't say cost benefit, because in this particular case, this particular project, they actually had similar cost benefit ratios, surprisingly. Okay? Well, it turns out that the flow of traffic alone probably paid for it. Okay? When I do this with students, I can tell you right now, the students almost always put number one, and it's not even close, the bypass. Okay? Because they say, well, it saves the most lives and the public wants it. And we sometimes have to do things that maybe we have to do a better job of explaining it to the public of why the roundabout might be a better idea. Okay. In this particular case, the initial idea was to put in a traffic light or a roundabout, and somebody proposed or putting in a bypass. And then what happened is they put in some temporary signs to keep things a little safer because there were some safety issues. It turned out they were working pretty well. Um, they they worked actually pretty well. That's how they got all the numbers. And eventually they did put a roundabout in this particular site. So, yep. And I like here in the Q&A, it says 80-20 rule. We proposed 80% don't want them after 80% like it. And that can happen if we do it well. If we do it wrong, it may stay the same way. So we got to do it right. Okay. I got an error in the bridge design. You arrive on a bridge site and the contractor lets you know they find a possible design flaw by your engineering firm. In this case, you're back to working for an agency, state or county or village or town. Okay, after looking at the plans, you say, yeah, you're right. There seems to be no steel between the wing wall and the abutment. And the concrete truck is on the way. Okay, concrete truck is on the way. So I'm gonna let you pick two things. What's the first two things that came to mind? Because you can do more than one. Okay, let's see what you do. First two choices, here we go. Are you gonna shut the job down? Are you gonna make a field change? Are you gonna notify the engineer, fire the engineer, or let the pour proceed? Now, I do this with people like yourselves who've been around a while. They almost always pick two choices. And sure enough, you're picking those same two choices. Okay? Notify the engineer and shut down the job. Okay? Yep. You certainly don't want to pour concrete if it's structural until you figured out why there isn't the steel. Okay? A lot of students will say, oh, I'll just make a change. But the risk, of course, with doing that is, guess what? You picked up the liability. You become the engineer of record. You really don't want to be doing that because there may be a reason in this case. I'm glad, by the way, nobody said fire the engineer. We're humans. We all have issues where we make a mistake. Um, in this particular case, it turns out there was supposed to be steel. It just didn't get transferred to the drawings. There was steel on the bar listing, but not on the actual plans. Okay? So we found a way to use the concrete to pour some concrete anchors for a guide rail and then figured out what was going on and got it fixed. But the challenge, of course, is be very careful. Don't make field changes, even though I said sometimes you need to. Don't make them in a vacuum. Don't make them by yourself unless you want to become the engineer of record, because that can create some things. Okay? But yeah, it can be challenging. And by the way, this was pre-cell phone. There was no cell phone. And by the way, I don't think there's cell phone service to that site even to this day. Okay? Now, in this case, you've got another project designed by another engineering firm, and you're out there and you notice that the design has been changed slightly and that this is not it. Okay? Um, It calls for a big 1/2 inch bolt, but you notice that instead there are three smaller 3/8 inch bolts in the joint connecting two things together. What are you going to do? And again, I'm going to let you choose two, what you came up with first. Are you going to note it on the as-built, discuss with the engineer, run some calculations to check it, use the original design, or don't provide as-built? And I'm assuming, by the way, in this particular case, you don't know why one bolt was chosen versus three. Okay? And again, you should be able to pick two. Most of you discuss it with the engineer. No issues. Nobody can argue that one. That is an absolute because you're going to figure out why. What gets fun here in this one is what is your second choice? Okay? Some people say, well, I'm going to note it on the as-built. Some people run a calculation. Some people say you got to go back to the original design. Um, I'm not saying there's might never be other things that are out there. Okay? There might be reasons they did it, but you got to figure out why. If it's a case of something connecting like a mast arm or a guide rail or something like that, that one bolt could actually be purposely done so it fails. Okay. And remember, if you run calculations, you're starting to get in that boundary of you're starting to become the engineer of record. So you have to figure out why. That's going to be the key in this particular case. I would do my best to not let them go forward until you figured that out. And that's why discussing with the engineer is definitely the first thing that you would do. So this one's not too bad. You did a good job. Okay. Steel inspector. Been asked to inspect a steel frame by a contractor. Now you're in the private sector. The private job. You've had several engineers look at the job, or excuse me, that several engineers have looked at the job before, and none of them so far will certify the work of the welding and the bolting and all that fun stuff. And after review, you feel the same way. Okay? So what are you going to do? And again, you get to rank these. You get to rank these. Are you going to walk away, talk to the contractor, letter to the contractor, letter to the owner, or letter to the building inspector? And again, you can do more than one choice. Or excuse me, you're going to rank these. Okay. And some people are putting in contact the building inspector, talk to the contractor, letter to the contractor. Okay. So most of you are ranking it in such a way that talking to the contractor is first. And the reason I put this one in here is ask yourself, at what point do you say, look, I know this has been looked at before. I can talk to the contractor till I'm blue in the face, and it's not changing anything. At what point do you have to put in a letter? And if you're going to do a letter, who does it go to? Do you only send it to the contractor? Do you really need to send it to multiple people? At what point, what line do you say, no, I've got to do more? That's always a challenge. There's never a quote unquote right or wrong answer in that particular case. So just something to keep in mind um, that I always want people to think about. At what point do you have to do more than just talk to folks? So we prefer that. But we also know the real world, sometimes you have to put it in writing to protect yourself, liability wise, but also ethically. Okay. Now, I'm going to put you back there. You're working for a village. Okay. And you find a crew member has been falsifying records for the maintenance of the gas tanks. Okay. Now, in this particular case, all they were doing was writing numbers down improperly. They weren't actually measuring. But it turns out that other than that, there's no other violations. And it turns out you've got other ways to figure out what the actual quantity should have been. So you could actually figure out the correct numbers and update them and get them corrected. Okay? But if you report this to the DEC, you're going to get a lot of folks on the crew angry with you. Okay? So let me ask you, I'm just going to see what you think you would do. Okay? Are you going to report the violation to the DEC? Are you going to make sure the crew starts reporting properly? Are you going to discipline the crew member? Or are you going to fix the records? And pick your first thing that came to mind. Okay? I actually like this answer. This is good. I haven't always seen this. And that's good. I actually, of all the choices, again, you're probably going to do more than one of these. But I like the idea that you're thinking, what I really need to make sure of is the future. We're going to do things right going forward. Make sure the crew does it correctly and understands why. Because that's what we really need to be caring about. Fixing a current problem is important, but making sure it doesn't continue is also very important as well. Okay? Now, I know it's hard to report. Oops, too far. It's hard to report the violation to DEC, but that may be the right thing. You're going to have to ask yourself if it got out that you failed to report it, what would you think about? Okay. So it's a challenge. There's no right or wrong answer in some cases. That's what makes ethics, again, I think a little bit of fun. Okay. And again, if we had a whole hour, we could really get into the details on this particular one. Okay. Okay. Now, here's one. We're going to do this one twice. Okay, we're going to do this one twice. So just be ready. I'm going to clear it once, and we're going to do it twice. Okay. So you are now working in the private sector. Okay. You are a contractor. Okay. And you're having lunch at a local restaurant, and you see the State Department of Transportation's project engineer sitting at the other end of the dining room, and you've you've been working with the person for a long time and great project, and it's the holiday season. You're going to show your appreciation. So what are you going to do? Are you going to go over and buy, are you just going to buy her lunch? Hey, pay for her lunch? Are you going to go and ask her first before you pay for her lunch? You're just going to stop by and say hello. When you get there, you're going to ask about her French fries and say, hey, you're going to eat those? Or you're going to do none of the above. And if you do none of the above, I do want you to throw it into the Q&A what you would do. Okay? Okay, so most of you are going to just say hello. A few of you might ask her first. Okay? And nobody's asking about the French fries. That's fine. Okay, so now I'm going to clear the answer. Don't answer. Everybody hold up. Let me clear the answer. And I want you to change the date. Right now it's 2026. I want you to answer that question as if it were 1976, 50 years ago. What do you think the answer would have been? Yeah, yeah, pretty much everybody paid for lunch. Yep, that was what you did. You just paid for lunch. There wasn't any question. Nobody even thought about it. Ethics does change over time. Okay? And so we need to think about the fact that we are changing over time. And so ask yourself those questions. Okay? Now, in terms of time, I'm going to skip a couple here. Let me see what I'm going to go to. I'm going to skip the next one. I'm going to go, this was one of my, I'm going to pick a few more, just timing wise. We're going to go to Goat Speed Racer. Okay? The town wants a speed limit lowered in front of a road that happens to go by the supervisor's house from 45 miles an hour to 30, and they hire your firm to do the engineering study. And you do the engineering study, and you conclude using the state standards that the speed limit should be raised to 50 miles an hour instead. Okay? So, what are you going to recommend? Are you going to recommend that they don't change the speed limit, leave it 45? You're going to lower the speed limit to 30, recommend that. You're going to raise the speed limit to 50. You're going to revise the study results, or none of the above. And we'll see what you guys vote for. And I hope you don't pick one of them, because this happened. Somebody got in trouble. I don't think they lost their license in this particular case, but they did get in trouble. There are ones people have lost licenses for. Okay. I'm glad nobody chose lower the speed limit to 30. It's hard sometimes to push back on political folks, but um, no, there's a reason why they've actually set it into state law here in New York that to lower the speed limit to 25, and technically, if you read the law, any lowering of speed, changing of speed limit has to be done by an engineer who understands speed studies. Okay? And yeah, why would you leave it at 45 when the study said 50? Could you explain that one to me? Give me in the Q&A real quick why you would do that. Let sleeping dogs lie. Yeah, that's a good one. Safety, maybe a little slower is not too bad. Driveways, but remember the study did that. The study showed all of these things. The real reason why you might leave it at 45 versus 50, if you think about it, is this 5 miles an hour? Yeah, there we go. It's not really a substantive change. It's hard to justify the effort if it's only 5 miles an hour, especially if it's going to go up. Okay? But you have to ask yourself, what's the boundary? At what point do you say, nah, it's definitely worth doing it? Okay? Okay. So we're going to do now vendor specs. You're going to go buy a truck. You're back to working for a government agency. I'll say you're working for a county this time. And you got a local truck dealer who gave you a set of specs that you like for a new dump truck. Okay? And your whole fleet currently is the same brand. They're all Fords, they're all Internationals, they're all the same brand. I'd love to say Rockaway, but we don't have that choice right now. You'd like to do the whole fleet in the same brand, whatever that brand is, for standardization purposes. Be like Southwest Airlines in the 737. So are you going to just use those vendor specs? Are you going to try to standardize, which means going to the elected board and getting approval to standardize? Are you going to use multiple vendor specs and blend them in? Or you're going to keep using the specs, but go get some competition. When you go out to bid, make sure that many people are using those specs. And which one of those would you choose? Okay. And by the way, while you're answering, somebody asked in the last one, did the 45-minute limit happen due to a study? No one's sure. It was old enough, no one's really sure. So I would say probably not, but no one's really sure. Okay, so most of you would try to go to the board and standardize. And at least you want to get some competition. And it can be difficult to sometimes get the competition. But remember, you can request. People don't have to answer the bids, depending on your policy. If you get five things you've sent out and people who are interested, but only two of them submit, you're still okay. You still met the rule of three. Again, depending on how you wrote your policy up. Don't write your policy that you only get two, you're done. Try to write it so that I've got five people who expressed interest. Standardizing, I'd like to do that, but I know that can be very, very, very difficult to do. It can be almost impossible. Okay. We got time to do one more. We're going to go to the flying mailboxes. Okay. Um, One of your snowplows has knocked over a mailbox. And it's not just the wing, not just, I mean, with the wing. I mean, I love people say, oh, how do you know the difference? No, you can tell. If it gets hit by the wing, it's very, very different. And by the way, this is not an acceptable mailbox for any reason. But you don't have a policy. You realize there's no policy for what the agency is supposed to do. And you really, really would like to have a policy, but you're getting pressure to go ahead and replace the mailbox. So what are you thinking right now? What are your thoughts? So I'm going to let you put in what you're thinking about doing in this particular case. It may happen in a couple of months, you know. By the time we get into October, it's very possible. So you're going to go ahead and replace it, okay? Because you might get bad press otherwise, okay? And by the way, somebody put in there, if you knocked it down, they replace it with a standard mailbox. They don't put back fancy ones, okay? Most people are replacing it. And by the way, the most common policy across New York State is that if the agency hits the mailbox, they replace the mailbox. Most agencies say it actually has to be hit, not just knocked down by snow. Some agencies, the second most common thing we see, is that the agency gives a stipend, a check for a certain amount of money to let people replace it. And they tell them, here are the standards you have to follow. And they use the post office standards. Okay? Some people, somebody put in here, if they want a fancy one, they'll get it and they'll put it up. But the key, remember, if you're putting them up, make sure it's crash worthy, because if you put up something like that and it gets hit, you picked up all the liability, not just even the ethical problem, but the liability as well. So having a policy is important. New York State, actually, the comptroller's office has said mailboxes are a gift. You can't do it at all. But we found, talking to enough folks and some attorneys, that if you have a consistent policy, so it treats everybody the same, that's going to be the thing that helps you out. So you're consistent, going all the way back to the policies we talked about a long time before. Ooh, I like that. Saw a 10-man mailbox in Wisconsin that had a real axe. Ooh. That could be dangerous, but yeah. Okay. So in our last 3 minutes, we're just going to do a couple of quick conclusions. I don't get to my two new ones, but I got two new ones sitting in the wings. I got one yesterday. I decided not to add it yet, but it'll show up the next time we do this class. So I want you to think about what you're going to do before the ethical incident happens, if you can. So as you're driving around, as you're thinking about all the things your agency does or your company does, think about places where you might have an ethical dilemma. What would you do if something happens? Now, as you probably realized, even simple problems are going to have multiple answers. This is a very simplistic review. You might want to look at some of the references that are in the handout that list links to much more detailed studies. And I always, if I'm not sure, what do I want to do? I always go back to that first canon and ask myself, what's the safety, health, and welfare? And if I can improve safety, health, and welfare, I'm usually okay with that, even if sometimes there's a bit of a conflict. Now, I'm going to end with one that actually happened here on the Cornell campus. And I found, this is a picture I took. And I'm going to ask you what you think I did. It said, all doorstops will be removed on Monday, February 22nd for state fire inspection on Tuesday, February 23rd. Doors are not to be propped open during this time. Doorstops will be returned on February 24th. Now, it's on a Sunday. I'm walking around one of my hikes, and I can't get in the building. It's locked. So what would you do? Throw in the Q&A real quick for me, and then we'll let you get out of here right on time. What would you do? See if somebody can figure out what they think David Orr would have done, or what would you do? Might be different, and that's okay. Find a window? I like that. I couldn't find a window, not this particular building. I don't have a key. Every key's got its own system. We actually use keys and cards as a place a rock to hold the door open. Yeah. What I did is I couldn't get in. Okay, it was a nice thought. I couldn't do it. I didn't know who the building manager was for that particular building, but I knew my building manager. And this is the kind of thing, it wasn't a fire safety issue. I wasn't going to call the public safety people immediately. But what I did is I talked to my building manager the next day. And we talked about the fact that this is really not correct. They really shouldn't be doing that. And he's like, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't be propping doors open. People need to understand where they're supposed to be, door stops are supposed to be used and when they're not supposed to be used. And he reached out to that building manager. And I thought that was a good middle compromise. Okay. Now, I'm going to let you get out of here. I don't want to forget, though, we do have webinars, one more next week on snow and ice and the workshops. Please sign up. And it's 10 o'clock. So I'm going to let you out of here right on time. If you have any questions, please send them to us. Be glad to answer them. And if you got a good ethics problem, please send it my way. I'd love to have them. And how do you pay for the PDHs for those who want them? Barbara can help you out. We can take care of that. Just send us an email, and we can take care of it. Everybody have a great day, and we will catch up with you soon. Bye bye.